RFC was terrible, like horrible, like worst FC in the history of FCs. I was that FC. I mean, yeah, who knew? Anyways, this was the Battle of RF TAC. It was a battle that was really going to determine the fate of 6 different citadels, and so it was kind of a big deal. And unfortunately, I kind of inherited the role of FC. Let's dive in and talk about what went right, what went wrong. Let's get going. So the Battle of RF TAC was, as I mentioned, really the gateway for up to 6 different citadels that were owned by TSC and their allies. Really the cleanup from the Gen Fed war, if you will. Now, these citadels had been put into whole over the last week and a half or so by Silent, and so this battle was really going to decide if there was going to be a substantial enough force left over to defend them, or if there was going to be 6 free kills from Silent. Now, as we were here on the gate in AJI, we were able to jump in. We did have about 64 battleships. You can see here as the enemy was on the gate, they had a couple of different contingents. They had their main brawling here on the gate, and then they had a couple of other ones up above. Specifically, they had Logi and then some of their more heavy kite type of drone ships. Now, right off the bat, we did find Momosaurus Rex, who is obviously a rather large part of Gen Fed. Some might even say the top dog in Gen Fed. But she was flying a Nightmare today, and as we got onto grid, we were able to basically jump on top of her and try to start taking her down. Now, the problem, obviously, is that a Nightmare is very tanky, and so even though there were some calls there, the FCs did decide to kind of free fire on battleships other than her. Now, the problem was that as we started moving here, RFCs started getting picked off, and so kudos to Gen Fed. You guys were very organized. You guys had a hit list, and you ran through it. You can see here, I am already less than about a minute in now the FC. I've got the fleet focus fire here. And the reason for that is that, well, we didn't have anybody left. We had, I think, 5 different FCs that all got headshotted within the first minute or two of being on grid. And so in the confusion, I just kind of started talking on comms and took over. Now, what had happened here is that we did have our Logi. You can see them. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and just apologize because this is going to be a little bit more shaky because I was trying to FC rather than just trying to get content. But you can see down here at the bottom, we did have our Logi. The enemy had that fleet up there that was able to kind of chase, and we were really going to be focusing down the enemy fleet and trying to kind of regroup a little bit was my main objective here. Now, the thing that I want to call out very quickly is that if you actually look, you can see that we have Momosaurus here, and when we start looking at the enemy fleet, they were down here. And what happened, and I don't know if this was intentional or just, again, really good play by Momosaurus, but when she realized that we were targeting her, she actually moved away from her main fleet, and then I don't think that it's actually up quite yet, but they did put up a different bubble to protect the fleet here and basically counteract our brawlers. Now, what was really great about this is that because we were under Momosaurus Rex's bubble, we were kind of protected from the enemy, but they were also protected from us because they had their own bubble as well. Now, if I keep going here, you can kind of see that we were trying to figure out what was going on. We were getting our permissions set. We were unfortunately losing ships while we were doing that. And so eventually I just started calling targets and trying to get the fleet back together. Now here, if I was to look at this, you can kind of see that I decided, okay, I realized what was happening. You can very clearly see the bubble there and the Momosaurus bubble there. And so I basically said, okay, let's redo this, let's reset, and let's actually get back into the main bubble and start brawling. Now, again, because I wasn't the original anchor, I wasn't the original FC, I kind of Leroy Jenkins my way in here, and I don't know how I survived, to be perfectly honest. I'm going to credit the Logi Bros with doing a fantastic job for that. But you can see eventually we did start getting some more of our fleet coming in here and here. And eventually we were able to kind of come to grips with the main brawler fleet of Gen Fed and their allies. Now, that being said, again, because it was very difficult for us to actually be able to coordinate because we had different fleets going on, people weren't sure who I was, what my voice was, which ship I was in. And so it did come a little bit unnaturally for people to anchor up and to be able to follow commands just based off of kind of what I was saying. You can see here, unlike the normal kind of tight blobs that we have, we're really pretty spread out over the kind of the grid here. Now, as we started moving in, this was a really interesting dynamic because we were able to basically get the first fleet that Gen Fed had, which was, again, kind of this main alpha fleet, while we were all still packed together. But as you can see moving down here, we did have an enemy fleet that was actually chasing after our Logi. So if I pause this here for just a second, our Logi is here, and you can see this enemy fleet that's kind of making their way down towards the Logi. Now, this was, again, something that I talked about in the last video, and how important that Logi plays and how poorly things can go when you don't have your Logi. And so I was really, as the FC, kind of recognizing that this was happening, realizing what a big danger this was. And I'd like to say that I reacted quick enough, but I kind of did and I kind of didn't. Now, as I was realizing kind of what was happening, and I can't take full credit here because I was called out on comms, but as I kind of realized what was happening here, we decided to try to move down and basically cut these guys off. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, we were able to get to grips with them, and these ships were primarily the drone ships of the Gen Fed fleet. You can kind of see as we're going in, they were, again, targeting the Logi. You can see their drones coming off this way, which was where our Logi was, unfortunately. Again, I'm zoomed in a little bit because I was trying to pick off targets as opposed to really getting a good view of the battlefield. Probably not a great idea for a situational awareness perspective, but again, you can kind of see we start getting to grips, and you're seeing the Armageddons, the Dominixes, things like that. Now, again, we were underneath the shield bubble of the enemy, and so I wasn't targeting the enemy FC. Again, looking back, I think that's probably one thing I should have done is target that FC a little bit earlier, kind of repay the favor that they gave us of headshotting all of our FCs. But either way, we were able to take down a number of battleships. We got a Balgorn here, which I was very happy about because it's an expensive kill, and I like having expensive kills. I don't like being an expensive kill, but yeah, whatever. Now, the other interesting thing, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, I just had basically my fleet here. You can see a lot of the other alpha fleet that we had was still up top kind of brawling, so we did have our fleet split. At the time, I didn't really realize this. I was so focused on getting those targets called for my fleet and being able to do as much damage as possible. But again, unfortunately, that's just kind of what happens when you lose that communication and people lose that structure that they're used to or expecting. Now, with that being said, we did do a fair amount of damage to the drone ships because they are pretty squishy, relatively speaking. When it comes to being under a shield bubble, most of the meta is not for you to be individually tanky, and that was what we really saw. You can see a lot of these ships are popping pretty quick because they don't have the protection of that shield bubble. Now, I'm not sure where the enemy Logi was. I think that there might have been focusing on the fleet up here. Again, with half of our fleet being split, they did have a lot of DPS still on the field, and I think that they were really focusing on mopping up kind of the stragglers from the other fleet that weren't getting my commands. Now, that is unfortunately just kind of the way that this engagement went, and I'm proud of our guys and really proud of Silent for sticking together and not just completely collapsing when we lost some of these FCs. Big thank you to, again, all of our Logi because you guys kept us alive as long as we were, and ultimately it was a really good fight. Now, we're not quite done here. You can see that as the enemy is starting to kind of move down, this is where we really started to get into trouble. Unfortunately, I was not nearly as quick as I should have been to recognize the threat that this fleet posed, and I was kind of like, oh, let's finish off these guys first and then move over. That was the wrong call. I recognize that. I know that. So again, for all the things that I just gave the Logi Bros, sorry guys, I kind of let you down there. But you can see here, the enemy fleet, they were a little bit spread out, but they were able to close in on our Logi. They tore them up really, really fast. I was hearing on comms, unfortunately, just the screams of dying Logi. It was not a pretty sight. But, unfortunately, we weren't able to quite hold our own in that particular stance. I think at this point we were down to something like 10 Logi, something like that. That number quickly dwindled. But we did end up kind of moving back in towards the enemy. It was good from a last minute decision to try to rush in, to try again do as much damage as possible. But at this point, I think it was probably a little too late. But we did kill over 20 battleships. I think we ended up with a little bit more. At the start of the engagement, they had something like 65 or something like that to our 64. So again, it was very even in terms of battleships, and we really did have a pretty good showing for kind of what happened and where we were. Now, if I'm looking at the rest of this fight and kind of the way that it broke down, again, without Logi, we did start losing pretty quickly. I again kind of got distracted by Mamasaurus's nightmare. Instead of going back into this fight over here, we were basically, if I redo this, we were on Mamasaurus over here. This was kind of the main fight. I should have realized that and moved into the main area here with the remnants of our other fleet. Again, clearly I didn't, and that's on me. That's unfortunate, but it kind of is what it is at this point. So with that being said, as this fight was winding down, again, you can see me and my little self just Leroy Jenkinsing back into the middle of the fray. At this point, we were trying to focus mainly on getting as many battleships off the field, whether they were T8 or T10. And unfortunately, I didn't do a great job of target calling at this point. I started just calling whatever was closest and what I could see. I should have continued to focus down the T8 battleships first, because as was said on comms, it's much harder to take down a T10 battleship. They're much tankier than the T8 ones. So that's something that I'm going to be taking away from this, is just working on my target calling and being able to really focus on taking some of those lower tanked ships, I guess, if that's the right word, less tanky ships, taking some of those out so that I can, really be able to actually do some damage as opposed to just, pounding away at a ship that I can't break. Now, with that being said, as we did try to kind of finish off the battle here, we did realize that we were not going to be able to hold this grid and not going to be able to win. And so we did decide to disengage. Now, you can see, again, that a lot of the enemy fleet is over here. I believe that was their Logi, so they were very, very much alive, to the point where we actually had trouble with the ships that we had left, breaking some of these just even Tempests and stuff like that. So Gen Fed, your Logi was fantastic as well. Great job, again, in headshotting RFCs. While I don't like to say that, it was, I think, the right call ultimately. And you guys can see here, I'm starting to move the fleet back because we've realized that we just can't take this grid. We don't have quite enough Logi. We don't have quite enough DPS. And I'm just really glad that I didn't completely wipe the fleet, because that would have just been a really awkward and kind of a bad first time for, being an FC, even if it was a little impromptu. Now, that being said, with, again, the way that all of this broke down, Gen Fed was able to defend all 6 of their citadels, I believe. I don't think they lost any. Somebody down in the comments let me know if that's not the case, but to my understanding, they were able to protect everything. And again, just with kind of where we're at in the war and all that stuff, I think that was a big win, because the war is technically over, and this is, again, a very small subset of like TSC and some of those other corps that are trying to maintain their SOV. Because they haven't, reached an agreement with Silent and blah, blah, whatever you want to talk politics. It's not my job. That's not what I want to do. But either way, I think if I were to look at this engagement, it was a lot of fun. I really did enjoy it. I think that if I were to grade myself in terms of being an FC, I think that my communication was probably a B. There was a lot going on. There were multiple FCs trying to figure out where things were happening, and we had our Logi and our Kite and all of that compared to me in the alpha. I probably should have been a little bit more assertive. So I think that would be one thing that I need to improve. My target calling overall, I'm going to say a B minus. While I was pretty happy looking back and reviewing the film at how I actually called some of the targets, especially at the beginning of the engagement, I do think that I need to really improve on kind of picking those targets a little bit better, being aware of where those bubbles are, things like that. And then finally, my situational awareness. Honestly, I'm going to give myself a C minus on this one. While I did realize that Momosaurus was pulling us out and we were not able to hit those targets in the other bubble, I didn't do it fast enough, and I didn't realize where some of those other fleets were because I was so zoomed in. I think next time I need to zoom out a little bit more, be able to see where that where those enemy fleets are and how they're how they're approaching our Logi, to be able to really kind of look at that. But overall, like I said, I think I'm pretty happy with this being my first real engagement. I've done a lot of small gang stuff, but this was really kind of the first big fight, with the system topping out at about 300. This was definitely no small feat. Gen Fed and TSC, great job, guys. This was a great fight. I really enjoyed this. I'm glad that I got to be a part of it. I wish that it had been a little bit smoother on our end, but it is what it is, and I got this cool experience out of it. That's it for now. Thanks so much for joining. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to hit me up in the comments or in Discord. Be happy to talk you through a little bit more of what I was thinking here on the battlefield. But until next time, thanks so much for joining. Have a great night, weekend, whenever you're watching this. And remember, kill marks last forever, and fly safe.